my heart at ease. Gonna make a sentimental journey to renew old memories. Got my bag, I got my reservation, spent each time I could afford, like a child in wild anticipation.
So in 1981, the Ideal Village Development Cooperative bought the Crystal Ranch, which was some odd 950 some odd acres, and it was developed into three areas: Radiance, Goldenwood West, and Goldenwood. And so Eve knew the Crystals before all that happened. She also lived over on Friday Mountain, right? Friday Mountain Camp, which is now Barcelona. All right, so that pretty much is everybody's Goldenwood.
We came in 1952 to be part of an outdoor education lab that was held at Friday Mountain by the Austin Independent School District. This was one of a kind, the only one in Texas, other than in Lufkin. And this brought the upper elementary children in Austin, it was 6th graders, out to the woods for a week. And they brought their teacher and no books or writing material. They spent the week visiting and exploring and making limited collections. Every kid would pick up the same arrowheads and leave them, and my husband would go along and scatter them along. My husband was the naturalist. There were two other naturalists. These, the staff were not called Mr. and Mrs. They were called Aunt and Uncle. It was very casual because they lived with their teacher, who still remained Miss Smith or whatever. But the staff out here was Aunt and Uncle. And the kids were marvelously relaxed and just full of the adventure and the spirit of exploring the woods. And the goal was to develop some ecological experiences, conservation, native flora and fauna. We'll wait a minute, we're getting some more friends.
Oh, come on in.
Oh, you can go right ahead. We're not coming in right now.
They had a broadened curriculum within the science department. It was 6th grade in Austin, and generally was 6th grade as it developed across the U.S. It had been done in Denmark, too. I don't know about Norway, but it had been an experience for appreciating the land around you. And of course, ecology was a new word in 52. So the children got a new concept. And without having to write anything, but just feel like they're really learning, it felt marvelous in a way to help the kids that were non-participators in class, who were slow readers or who wanted to let their mind wander out the window. They were out the window. They were out in the woods. And they tramped all around the bottom of the hill. But you're interested in Mrs. Crystal and her husband. And we were able to meet the Crystals. And they loved my two little red-headed boys. And we came over every Saturday for eggs and whatever else Miss Crystal might have. They lived a rather Spartan existence. It probably doesn't look any better now for growing grass than it did then for growing anything else. The Crystals had an old house, and they lived in it with joy and comfort and no complaints. She made the best pound cake you'll ever with her own eggs and milk, and she made it in a wood stove. And her entire cooking device in the kitchen was this old wood stove. And I said, I don't know how to cook this cake. It's delicious. And she says, I put in 2 logs this big and 1 small one, and then I stir them in about 20 minutes, and they've created enough heat to cook the cake. She knew cake cooking log by log. But we had to set the temperature and she was a lovely person, very down to earth, but loved to embroider, and had at one time one of the elderly parents, I don't know which parent it was, just a lady who was quiet and reserved, didn't visit. And I can tell you very little more about the crystals, but I can tell you more about what's over the hill. If you're interested.
Sure. So can I ask one question? Was the relative, I don't know who she was, who lived in the log cabin, was she still alive?
I don't think so. I don't remember a separate.
That was Roll's mother.
Oh, that was Rose's mother?
Yeah.
Roll's mother.
Yeah.
So she had probably lived there since she was a young girl. I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much all her life.
I didn't know him very well, but Anne was very sociable. And they didn't ever come over our way. We always came over. Below the hill was our baby, married to an naturalist. We were outside more than in. There's, in the realm of animal life, there's, in 1951, I came out and had a winter dinner and a horseback ride all through the area down there, and we had dumplings with squirrel and cane and rabbit. Very good.
They're still here.
I bet you're not eating them.
Not tonight.
We ride horseback up the creek, and my friend and I were very quiet, listening for the wildlife, and the horses really didn't annoy them. So we saw a lot of animals scurrying around that morning. Experience.
What kind of animals did you see?
I just told you we ate them.
Were there any in the non-edible category? Maybe some of the larger ones?
We had a lot of deer and
It's
turkey.
still edible and turkey.
Turkey.
The important ones.
We had wild turkey, and there would be as many as 12 or 14 in the flock. And my husband and I would put the boys to bed and then roam along at night. And we'd see, we'd flash the big flashlight toward what we call Wind Cove, down there where the cut is deep, just before there's a man-made dam. And there would be a lot of deer in that meadow. And we had all kinds of birds. One time he came in, he worked during the day, came up to the cottage at night, and I think our cottage is still there. Didn't we find it then? On the screen porch, an old place. In 1952, it was dilapidated. And my husband and I went to bed, and we looked up, and there's so many holes in the roof. We said, now is that Capricorn?
When did you leave Friday night?
It closed in 56, so everybody left, but Rodney kids still ran the camp.
So you left when it closed?
Well, Austin Independent School District just rented it for the winter. And it was a big blessing because in a square cabin down toward the grove of trees down in the meadow, and the girls got to sleep upstairs. And the classrooms were downstairs. We had a cook and the cook's husband, and I think we had a helper other than that. And the children at the camp learned community living. Some of them had never spent a night away from home. And they came in cardboard boxes, Oxidol or whatever. And if you had fancy luggage, but for the most part they came out with the jeans and 5 pairs of underwear and 5 pairs of socks, and stayed Monday through Friday afternoon. And they never wanted to go home. They seldom got sick. They learned to set the table in an orderly way. They served. They ran a small convenience store. Kids that forgot toothpaste or powder.
And was it year-round?
No. See, it was from September to first middle of May.
Okay.
And then summer camp took over, directed by Rodney Kidd. The winter activities, they had to have a lot of wood. I don't recall that the kids ever were asked to chop wood, but they were given some instruction on building a log cabin. And that one log cabin, the construction job went on for about 6 years. The class might get one log up on top of the log. They had all 3 meals. Their teachers took a back seat and the 3 naturalists took over. And they loved that.
So pretty much every 6th grader in Austin got to come out with that length of time going on?
No.
Oh.
Unfortunately, black kids were not allowed on the place. And we didn't have, when 56 came up, then integration was positive, had to be, and was no longer accepted. And it's a tragedy to think that 2 highly educated people, Walter Prescott Webb and his wife, who owned the place, did not allow blacks to sleep with whites, and therefore that ended the whole thing. Austin Independent School District was glad to hear that because it was becoming expensive, and they've done a lot of repairs. You know, the plumbing work for gang toilets and showers, and they had winterized the big institute, and that was lost. Of course, that may have been part of the plan, but the kids were comfortable, even in bad weather. They had activities in the house in institute, and they had activities that involved taking care of donkeys, chickens. We had always had 2 or 3 calves that needed fed with a bucket with a nipple on it. Cafeteria, do you know it? Well, it's just an ordinary pail, but at the bottom is a big long nipple, and you pour calf food in there, sort of like baby powder and water, slosh it around. The calf drinks out of the bucket with the big nipple. Kids take care of these activities. We didn't have chickens to lay eggs or do anything productive, but there were sometimes we had banty chickens, and pigs. They
Horses?
No donkeys. Maybe 8 donkeys.
So do you think, one time I was riding up there and smelled something and tracked the smell and it was a feral pig. So do you think
There might have been, I don't recall ever encountering one. They're pretty dangerous, but they're considered aggressive if you get in the wrong place.
So Eve, can you talk about the creek? And one of the things I'm curious about is how many months out, if there were months out of the year when it didn't run, and when it did run, you know, how much water was in it? And
Bear Creek in 54, 5, and 6 was full of water all the time. Never ceased running. And was beautiful and clear and delightful. And we swam down at Windy Cove. It grew watercress. I had watercress for salads most all the time. And had a friend come out from the Statesman and had a picnic with us, and part of the picnic was my homemade bread and watercress out of the creek, and you know, we made it real down home, and we put the watercress in the salad, and she was in the middle of eating it, and my heart just walked right through the watercress, and then she kind of turned her nose up at the watercress.
That creek that we crossed coming up here from the highway, is that Crystal Creek or Bear Creek?
Bear Creek.
That is, so there is no Crystal Creek.
That's Little Bear.
that's Lou?
Crystal Creek is the one just downhill from here.
Yeah.
It's
What about the
in
side?
Radiance. It's only,
The one down by the by your house.
Yeah.
yeah.
That is Crystal Creek.
No,
Yes.
the one down by which?
By where you live.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's Crystal Creek.
That's Crystal Creek.
Okay.
Right
Yeah.
there.
But the one by the highway is actually Bear Creek.
Little
Little Bear.
Little Bear.
And now some
Sometimes
maps,
called Spring Hollow.
yeah, I was
Sometimes
sometimes
it's
it's
called
I've
Spring
seen that
Hollow.
on maps.
Tributary of Little Bear Creek.
Yeah, Little
Y'all
Bear
call it
is really the one that goes by the church. And they call this one Spring Hollow, or at least roll forward.
Yeah, the one by the church, the Friendship Baptist, right?
Yeah, that's
Bear.
that's
That's
Little
Bear.
Bear.
Oh, that's Little Bear, okay.
Yeah.
You may know where there's a park. Do you know where there's a park where two creeks run together? And
Yeah.
It's down past.
Down past Windy Cove,
Windy
below
Cove.
Windy Cove.
there was a mill there.
So it flowed that much that there was.
It flowed very well. And we always had fresh water to swim in. Never any mud.
Did
or
it,
anything.
was there ever talk of it going dry at all?
No.
And Spring
Not
Hollow?
in my memory.
Well, I remember when we moved down here, that Spring Hollow, there was always some water.
Yeah, Rolly used to always tell us that even in the worst years, at least there were pools of water in places along there.
Well, if he's talked to you, he knows more about it than I do. 'Cause he lived there. But we were here only in the winter. We had to live in the summer. And
Summer camp.
our quarters were occupied by the campsite.
So where is Windy Cove?
Windy Cove is down at Friday Mountain Camp, the old Friday Mountain Camp. It's way on the southeast corner there where there's a tall cliff on the far side from you,
Go down there.
curves around.
And are there big trees?
There's great trees, yeah, and there's, you know, usually a rope there so we can
Yep.
drop into the pool, things like that.
It's pretty deep for you.
Yeah, it's still there, still pretty deep.
The man on down at the next ranch, whose name I don't call, put the dam in. And must have had melon bread for some reason, but we love to stand under that spillway and get back massaged in this.
Did they ever have any mills along in Friday Mountain Camp itself? Because there's a couple dams there now.
Well, they're just preventing erosion, I guess, because they weren't any use of the water
What kind of mill?
with lumber mill.
Lumber?
But I don't understand that either, because wood for the old building my knowledge, was brought up from Bastrop. And that was a really good business. And the pine logs would have made those huge raptors. But I don't see, we have to have post oak to make those raptors, not live oak, which goes like this. You can't really make good supports with that. But at any rate,
Could have been from the cedar days, or the cypress days. There used to be a lot of cypress in this area.
I never
Until-
tried any cypress.
Look, there's cypress up at Camp Ben,
Ben McCauley, yes, there
Yeah.
are.
but all along Onion Creek and a lot of the other tributaries around here used to have a lot of cypress out here.
Was there more about buildings? You said something about where they built the temple or Son of Dawn. What did you? I couldn't
You
remember.
can't imagine that as being an old rock building.
Well, that
Oh,
yeah.
some
Tell us
can.
about that.
Those who saw it.
Yeah. Did you say that that was a heritage site that should
Should
have
not
happened?
have been covered up.
Yeah, it's still buried under there somewhere.
Yes, not disturbed, but it's certainly camouflaged.
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson Johnson was a rugged individual and evidently very capable, very intuitive. He was born in Norfolk, Virginia, but moved into Missouri when he was a young man and began teaching. And he was in Missouri about 5 years, which would put it about 1830. And he married a Missouri girl, and they migrated to Texas before it was independent. It was, well, Stephen F. Austin's colony was 1822, if I recall, and this was 1830. So, see, he was one of the first, and was offered a land grant, 40 acres. And the first and the most desirable one was 40 acres where UT is now located. And he turned that down. And his goal was to get enough land to build an institute for learning west of the Colorado. And he was very welcome because there was nothing like that here at all. And this was well thought out and organized. His initiative was remarkable for the time. He and his wife chose this area here so that the students wouldn't be influenced badly by the ills of the village of Austin, which had been in 14 years. And Walter Prescott Webb said that wasn't it. The guy was so tuned into booze that he needed to be out here so he himself could be free of the influence. He built log cabins, had some slave help. I don't think he owned the slaves, but in those days you could rent your neighbor's slaves. And when they had free time, they could come over and build your log cabin. And that's how workmanship was passed around a lot below the professional level. And
So they rented from the owners, the slaves didn't get any.
slaves were up on these ranches between here and San Marcos. And the family lived in log cabins, and the children that they brought into the institute lived in log cabins. And that sounds like a rugged life. They brought only boys. And the young men were frequently hard to handle. And this sounds so modern. The young men that were incorrigible were sent out here to Texas and put in log cabins and given a very restrictive, correct education. And sometimes they were slow learners, so the parents were a little bit ashamed of poor Willie, and Willie came off to Texas, and in the strict supervision of Thomas Jefferson Johnson and his wife, they settled down and got a good education. The education was from first grade through the BS degree in Winston. Now they taught reading, arithmetic, spelling was a big thing. The children were encouraged to learn definitions out of the dictionary, and they had to go page by page, and they had marvelous vocabulary. They refer to this. I'm going to pass this on later. They had family instruction for the most part. Bristletop, named for the manner in which he combed his hair. This water's hard, and Bristletop washed his hair, and all he did was drag his finger through it, and it was Bristletop and his wife, Catherine, taught, and they had 6 children, 5 of whom lived in little log cabins down there on the flats up the hill from Bear Creek. And by the time they got here, they had already taught in several villages along the way. Abbeville, I don't know where that town is in Texas. They had taught at several schools, villages along the way. I'll see it quickly. I hated to write, I hated to draw lines in my book. It's sort of handy. And by the time they got here, they were well tuned into teaching and were a good team. And there are 5 children who survived. One was buried along the way, and several had been born in Missouri. They stayed there 5 years, taught school. And they taught school 7 years along the way, moving from town to town westward. And by the time they got here, they had a 16-year-old daughter, and she took over the classes of French, music, bookkeeping. I thought that was interesting and considered that very important, and spelling. 16 years old, she handled all that. They had the first piano west of Colorado in this area, southern area. And they must have been a busy bunch. After a few years, like 3 years, they began building this rock institute. And they built the south wing, and you can't tell where that is. But when I lived here, it was very distinct, and the rooms were huge. And the windows, they had big glass windows. By the time I got here, I'm sure that was the case when the school was in progress. They taught on the 2nd floor, and Bristletop and his brood lived on the 1st floor, and the boys slept ride in every morning from having slept at another ranch. And at that ranch, they had to cut wood for their housing. And so Grizzle Tom had a good reputation. He couldn't have asked for $15 for these kids. They were from wealthy families that $15.
Do you have any indication how many children they had?
No. You know, but later, I'm going to take a look around and you can see the names, surnames of the families. Because the Sheltons here in town have kept a rostrum up to a point. You know, the current generation doesn't do as well as the older generation.
Weren't they coexisting with Indians?
No, the Indians were gone. I'll regress and pull that in. But the Emmett Shelton kept this list and has passed it on, but there's very little that I could get out of the Austin. You might find better sources. The children had discipline problems, and Grizzletop put them on the second floor and took the ladder away. Now, the only stairway was on the outside, and that's common. These big rock buildings were like a fortress to some extent, and he didn't even provide for an inside stairway. So they had to have porches, and the porches were handy because they slept on them in the summer. And the porch had the wooden structure braced against the rock wall and the steps. And sometime later they screened in those porches, but not for the first 50 years. And evidently we got the piano up there on the second floor. And Lizzie was the daughter who taught and was so precocious. She was well known. There's a book about Lizzie all by herself. She's very well known. And she taught piano, and she would come downstairs to manage as the cooking went on during the day. She and her mother would see that things were going correctly in the kitchen. Evidently hired that done. And if the kids missed a note, she took a pole and hit the ceiling. And there were marks on the ceiling, so they raised them with paint some years ago. And Grizzletop had a ladder, and so he would have trouble with the boys. And he would head up the ladder. And there were times when the boys were really raucous, they'd throw a bucket of water down on Grizzletop. But evidently he survived any challenge because he straightened those boys out. One boy ran away, and probably this is the only story of the one boy that ran away. There were probably many. And he went back into town, walked into town, Austin. And Grizzletop got into his buckboard and went right into the home. And he got there as soon as the boy got there. You know, they found out they were gone, and by the time, you know, the hours had lapsed, it took all day to get to Austin. And the kid managed to get into Austin and arrived just as Grizzletop got there. And the mother came out and said, well, I'll feed you before you go back. Grizzletop said, no, he can't eat. He goes back with me, and I'm not eating either, and we're getting back to the Institute. So I like his discipline. He had an idea of how those boys were going to be. And they were allowed to carry a pistol. Now, these must have been the 16-year-olds, not any younger, but some of those boys had And I don't know how that happened, but it's in the stories. And discipline was a problem, although they had activities. It said, went to school from January to June. Others dispute that and say, no, it was a 9-month school system, and that's why the school was out in the summer, because kids were expected to work in the fields. And that was not slave labor, that was family survival. And so from June on till September, the kids took jobs at ranches around, and they were very well-liked kids to come because they were good at breaking horses. And where they learned that, I don't know if they came with those skills or just the doc had a few horses there, but they did have horses. And they did have slave cabins that were still hanging together in 1952. We could see the slave log cabins. And so they had some kind of black help. And
Where were those located?
they were near the barns. They were not far from the horses and the cows. Yes. And when I was here, they had the rail fences. And some were upright and some were crisscross.
So the barns were over by what we would call the girls' camp? Oh, more toward us?
No, they were pretty close to the big rock structure.
Okay.
And there were no houses anywhere around. I was surprised they could collect $12 and $15 a month for those kids. But the kids also milked cows, and firewood was necessary. They had to have an awful lot of firewood. That place, a rock, you know, once you got it warm, it was not too bad, but it wasn't good even at best, and it was big and cold. Well, talking about the pistols the kids were allowed to have, I don't understand that. There's a bullet hole under one of the windows over there, and we were always pointing it out. And
Do you think it was for the wildlife? Like, I'm just wondering
I
about
don't know,
snakes or...
because in the afternoons, they work at school until about 3 o'clock, 2 or 3 o'clock. And the kids then took off in the woods, and they had a ball. They went far and wide, and they had to be back for supper. But that was 2 hours of great, exploring all over the area. And they had to be back. They ate, besides the pigs, they ate a wild goat, and without refrigeration, they had to consume it pretty fast, so they killed smaller animals. And I'm sure they had beef too, but that's harder to keep. They'd have to dry it. After a while, from the 1830s till 1850, toward the Civil War, the girls in the neighborhood wanted this education with French piano, things that were intriguing. They wanted to come, and a ranching school was very good, but the girls couldn't spend the night, so they all had to be carted back home, and they could ride their horse in, put it in the lot or a trap somewhere near the house, and then ride it back home at night. So they did have girls. The children wrote quite a bit. Creative writing, we call it now. We think it's sophisticated. No. Their writings were much more sophisticated and are still in existence in some families and perhaps with the Webb collections, Walter Prescott Webb. They wrote themes. They had a long dissertation on the power of song and love of fame, and the log cabin, mission of tears. That might have been the Indian migration. And life is what you make it. And those kids had an amazing broad education. I would have loved to have been part of that. They wandered a lot, as I mentioned. I mentioned panthers, and you asked were the dangerous large animals. Yes, they ran around a lot, and it was not unusual to find panthers, bears, and we're trying to get the Mexican bears back into South Texas, but there were bears up here too. And they thought they saw an Indian standing on top of Friday Mountain, and they watched it for a little while, and it was a bear up on his hind legs and put his forelegs down and ran off. They didn't see an Indian, and I think they liked to watch for Indians. 2-day trip into Austin. There's this many pages of family names of people that were attending the Institute. Want to tell you a little about how much more time do we have?
It's 4 o'clock.
You want to quit?
No. I don't know, half an hour, something like that? Is that it?
All right.
May I ask for clarification? On the 2-day trip to Austin, was that by foot or by wagon?
Well, the kid probably had left and had a big head start, and he could also hit the ride. But he was on foot, but Bristletop had this.
And it took him 2 days.
And no, it took him one day to get in, and then they had to turn around and go back. The kid was without food or running off, and he was without sleep because he was in the buckboard.
Well, because I know that where McCowanville is, where that creek is, that was supposedly the first stage stop from Austin on the way.
McCowanville.
Where that, when you're coming out 1826, just close to 290, there's a stream, Slaughter Creek, and there's a dam and stuff like that. Because we looked at that property.
That was stage.
Yeah, and he took us in there and he said, he was telling us that that was the original stage thing. It was still standing. It was still some of the thing.
I'd love to know exactly where that is.
Well, if
You know where Slaughter Creek?
when you take 1826 out to 290, you go over a creek.
It's just this side of Lewis Mountain, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just after
The other side.
water
Other
tower.
side of those.
Big
So
water
that's-
tower, you go down into the flats there. That's-
You talking about the creek that has no sidings on it?
Yeah.
But that's not no rain.
Because that's Slaughter Creek.
Yeah.
For Robert, that's trucking tours.
Yeah, that's Slaughter Creek.
Okay.
When you say Lizzie, are you saying Lizzie Johnson?
Yeah.
Daughter of Thomas Jefferson Johnson?
Elizabeth.
Uh-huh.
She's only given the name Elizabeth here. Oh, she was a character. Now she, as I say, began at age 16 to be a teacher. And since she taught bookkeeping, Lizzie kept books for some of the ranchers around here and made a lot of money. She was very good and a good businesswoman. By the time she was 28, she was, since she'd been keeping books for ranchers, she knew all about it. She began to buy her own herd. And she developed her herd by the time she was 35. She had quite an investment in had several children, and she married this preacher. And his name was Hezekiah Williams. And they must have by then moved to town. She kept teaching long after the Institute closed down. And she had taught at a number of villages around in the area. And Lizzie was in the cattle business for sure, 1871. Well, that's when the, let's see, before that, the Confederacy was buying a lot of horses and some large amount of cattle to feed the Confederate Army. And Lizzie had made her mark. She knew how to keep the books. And is now called the cattle queen of Texas. She was buying and selling her own herd, and she made good money off the ranchers, and they came to her for good accounting of their own wealth. And they lived in town. Evidently, the preacher husband had cattle also. Maybe that's how they got together. But he ran his own herds up the Chisholm Trail, and she had. And she ate like the rest of the cowboys, and they hardtack and salt bacon, and bit the dust, and went up Chisholm Trail, took her cattle, and paid the help to steal some of her husband's her brand. And evidently he put up with it, or wasn't that good bookkeeper. And it was known, though, when you went up to Chisholm Trail, steal as many cattle as you could off of the ranches that you passed through. And even written history gives the cowboys only the money that they could make off of stealing cattle for their ride up the Chisholm Trail. They were not paid much at all. And stealing was part of it, but the brand made a big difference. And getting a creaky brand that was stamped crooked over somebody else's brand, your brand, and hide the other brand. It was quite a lot. The preacher died and left her with these children that she raised a nice family for him. Hezekiah died, and she bought him a casket, and it was a $600 casket. It was her money. She gave him back some of those casts. And she put a note on her casket. It said, I love that old buzzard this much. And so she showed off at the funeral that she did love him. The stories of Lizzie includes her extravagances. She may have been raised in a log cabin when she was a kid, but she had satins and laces. She wore 2-carat diamond earrings. She had a huge diamond in her hair comb, and she made a point of being well dressed until Hezekiah died. Then she went into black, and she never wore these beautiful things again, but she did throw them away. They were found. The Sheltons had some of her stuff, and because they'd been packed away for 30 years, when they passed from these that wrote this book went over to Miss Shelton's house, and she opened the trunk and let the kids put on Lizzie's fancy satin dresses. And so it's interesting that, you know, we're still safe.
So were the Sheltons neighbors?
No, Sheltons are in-laws,
Oh.
two generations down from Lizzie. And they lived in Austin, and Lizzie died, leaving, I remember reading about her once before. She had stuff stashed away behind stoves, and she had, you know, she went into a quirky thing, and she wore black and never wore those beautiful things that she acquired. But she had a lot of money. She had $50,000 worth of investment in the Bruegel Hall. I'm not saying that right. Brueggerhoff building on 10th and Congress. And I don't know but what that name's still up at the top. And look, I never thought about it. Brueggerhoff. And her estate, when she died, was $164,000 and something. So she worked hard. She stole lots of cash. And she had invested in downtown property. She knew what to do. So Lizzie was the most productive. Of the 5 children, nothing was heard of one. Then one of the sons kept running Johnson Institute 5 more years. Then it closed out, just sheer exhaustion. You know, that's a big operation.
So what year was that?
I have to figure. Wait a minute. We'll get that off of the date of Bristletop's death. Okay. Thomas Jefferson Johnson. He was born, no, the wife was born in 1810. He was born in 1805. And the wife died in 1868. I believe that's Bristletop's death, 1868, and 5 more will be 1873, and that's when Ben closed the Institute. And it, as big and handsome as that old building was, I looked to see if I had a picture, but I had only one, and it was too faded to bring out my scrapbook. It was nice. The rocks came from the riverbeds, Bear Creek, and there seemed to be this other creek that you call Spring Hollow Creek, and they loaded those rocks over. I'm pretty sure there were masons that might have been available in Fredericksburg, because those buildings in Fredericksburg were built by a very talented, very professional German masons, and I'm pretty sure that they were in existence in that period of time before the Civil War.
Was the rock masonry, was it seamless or was it with mortar? Did you say
It is with mortar. And you asked a question I haven't thought about, but it's just a logical guess.
It would, yeah. Is there any record of, is where 1826, was that the original road, or there was another road?
No, there are several roads. The road that they came out on was very close to Bear Creek, a long way. And this current 1826 went up to the top of the hill. And even when I traveled it, I was telling Ann, I got my like this. You know, every rancher wanted to keep his field intact, so you had to go to the corner. Now I use sweep along. Easy going.
Do you remember or recall caves that y'all were going around the land in caves?
Any caves? No.
I was going to ask about the arrowheads that you kept recycling and reseeding for the next crew.
Yeah.
Did you or your naturalist husband have any inkling about who was occupying the land prior to settlement?
Yes. You want to hear this? That's Tonkawa.
Oh, please. That would be good.
So, yes, and I did get help from Austin History Center yesterday, but I heard from my husband, and he heard from the from Walter Prescott Webb and Roy Bettercheck, who spent the winter right in Crankwood country up there in one of those north bedrooms. Roy Bettercheck was a very good friend of Rodney Kidd, Walter Prescott Webb, and the other famous
Joby.
Jay Franco. Yeah, they were all buddies, and I hope they didn't make any of this up. I don't Okay, Crankwood. No, Tonkawas. I was in Crankwood country when I taught the last few years down at Markham, Texas, near Palacios and Bay City. And that's Crankwood country, and there are wild stories down there too. I collected local history on tapes and put them in the museum, so it's been a hobby a long time. And put them in the museum for the high schoolers to get original notes